or using the cognitive skills that are required to be empathetic. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And as you see, I have the image of a spiral or an helix, if you want. And this is because this is how I conceive learning, and I conceive life is as a spiral. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Oh, hold on. Okay. So what if I ask you, I had actually a professor many years ago who started a class by asking us to let go of any construct that we had in our mind. And so if I ask you if you could silence your mind for a minute and forget everything that you know, stop comparing what you know with what you hear, stop evaluating the speaker, stop resisting any new ideas, and stop trying to reconfirm that what you know is the truth. This would be a huge requirement, right? Because we're the product of our lives and we're biased, and that's unavoidable. It's like, if I ask you this, it's like asking you to stop thinking altogether. And unfortunately, we cannot do that. The first time that I had a serious attempt at meditation, I sat there, I tried to stop my mind, and all I could think is like, I like my thoughts. They were interesting. So it was a big effort. So I have to always issue a warning, and the warning is that I am a divergent thinker. And if you're not familiar to what it means, I will tell you that this is about, how my mind works. I'm a creative person, and I generate ideas through free flowing, so it's like an unstructured brainstorming all the time. So it is not, sometimes it's very interesting to live inside that mind, but sometimes it causes me a lot of problems. And I remember the first time that I taught a class in the United States, this is 23 years ago. And one of the most common feedback that I got is that I was jumping all over the place, because I do. So that's why I'm warning you, So I require a safe space. I require you to be open to that possibility that I will be jumping around a little bit. And sometimes I'm not as structured as I should be, but sometimes I get a lot of inspiration out of that. And I need to use lateral thinking to be able to make of this divergent thinking a creative process. So this is pretty much like how it looks. This is what is going on in my mind, and sometimes this is how it comes out. So you have been warned. Now I'm going to ask you to make a list. And if you want to put it on the chat, it's good. If not, it's okay also. But make a list of 5 or 7 turning points that made you the educator that you are today. So this is, a piece of our lives, little turning points here and there, things that we got interested in, then we were not interested in that anymore, and the connection that we made in between the different ideas. And in the process of reflecting on those moments in our lives, something very clear comes out, which is that we were not the same person that we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We have suffered a transformation. That's what changes for me, is a process of transformation. So that's what transformative learning is about. We have a new person here. So transformative learning is always based on using our earlier experiences, because the frames of reference that we have to look at life, the frames of reference that define our lives, that give meaning to who we are and our experiences, comes from those earlier experiences. So look at those things that I asked you to write down, those turning points in the process of becoming an educator, from that perspective. And you will see that without those turning points, you would not be the educator that you are today. But the problem with frames of reference is they are made of assumptions, expectations, perceptions, and feelings. And this elicits certain kind of beliefs. We're immersed in a culture, and the culture shapes who we are. The caregivers shape who we are. And all of these assumptions are biased, right? They become habits of thought. They become, we interpret reality through these assumptions, and we cling on to them because they give us some sense of safety. And the problem here is that we tend to not accept other interpretations of reality. So frames of reference have two dimensions. I have these habits of mind and the point of view or the perspective through which we look at life. And so we can only change these habits of mind going through reflective practices. So that's why we recommend that students use reflective practices in their learning process. Otherwise, it becomes, banking learning. And we want them to use what they have learned to solve problems and see if it works so that they can reconsider assumptions. So it is through self-reflection that learners gain new and more global perspectives that help them integrate experience. So one of the things about this is that prejudice comes from habits of mind. We make judgments, we fix it in our minds, and this is the cognitive process that we use to look at the world. And so in order to undo these prejudices, we need to develop that part of our cognitive process that is what leads us to become empathic people. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. These are my points. These are my reference points, my turning points, what made me who I am. And this is a process that you can replicate with yourself and that you can bring to the classroom and ask your students, give me a few points of who you are, what made you the person who you are, what are your turning points. So this is Bogota. This is what I grew up. That's what I was born and what I grew up, a very big city. The city of eternal autumn, was I telling Maria Roca a few minutes ago. It was always overcast and very rainy and rather cold. And that's the city where I was born. And when I was 9 years old, I read this book called The Little Men by Louise May Alcott. And this is a sequel for her first book, The Little Women. And in this book, it's about how Jo, one of the protagonists from Little Women, she starts a little school with her husband, the Professor Bayer, and they educate for a little group of people, their own children also. And it's called the Plumfield School, and they learn. And one of the things that struck me about this book is the loving ambience, always. It's like the children were allowed to be children. The education was personalized. And I was 9 years old at that time, and I said, one day I want to have a school like this. It took me until, 35 years or so to build that school eventually. But the constant was that there was love and kindness. and they were not educating in fear. And so I started to think about this a lot. What's fear and what's love, and how can we educate in love and not in fear? And I learned about our regulation systems. I became a medical doctor, and in the process of becoming a medical doctor, I became very interested in neuroscience. And I learned that there were three main regulating systems in the brain. One, everybody knows about this one, is the fight or flight response, that we respond to threats with feelings of fear and rage, insecurity and anxiety. And those responses, the fight or flight response, everybody has experienced that. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Not everybody knows, though, about the drive system, which is a focus on achievement, competing, facing challenges. And this is how we respond sometimes to fear, the fear of failure, for example. And schools mostly are based on promoting the use of this regulating system in the brain, because you throw children to compete with each other. We continue doing that through college. We want them to compete. Who has the best grade? Who's going to be receive an award of this and that? And it's just an important regulating system, because it gives you motivation and it allows you to achieve things. However, in the process, a structure in the brain that is a little bit younger than all these two other places, the two other regulating systems, is the affiliation system. Because it's younger, it's only 200,000 years old in evolutionary terms. It's difficult to engage this one. This one needs to be trained. And that's what we're doing with Roots of Compassion and Kindness, the program that you probably have already heard about. And what we want is for students to consider what it is to be kind and to affiliate with others. And all of these systems are integrated and interrelated. One of the problems with the affiliation system is that when the threat system or the drive system are active, the affiliation system shuts down. The threat system works on adrenaline. The drive system works on dopamine. And the affiliation system works on oxytocin, which is not exactly, it's a neurotransmitter, but it also works like a hormone, and it's the hormone of bonding. This is what mothers release when they give birth, and helps them bond with the children. Why do I bring that on? Is because one of the problems about education, and one of the problems about the structure of education these days and the way we deliver our classes, and that is that they are based on grading students, and it puts the drive system on, and also the threat system, because students feel constantly, that if they fail, this and this is going to happen to them. They are in a constant stress. And stress is not conducive to love. It's not conducive to empathy. What is conducive to love and empathy is affiliation. And for affiliation, you need to connect from your life story. So you will see a red arrow going down in a moment. That's me. And so this is, I finished high school at 15. And in Colombia, you go straight to medical school. You don't do pre-med. You go through medical school, a block of 7 years of studies and practices. And I was 16 when I was already going to medical school. That was a great experience for me, but it changed my life in more than one sense. It not only provided me with a formal education and gave me a scientific method, etc., but also it opened me. The school functioned. The classrooms were in the hospital. This is a very old picture of that hospital. So you see the cars, that I'm not sold, So, but this was the hospital, and inside these walls, I learned something very important. I learned the reality of how people lived. So it was a transformative experience, and I needed to reflect on it constantly to understand what was going on, because I had been born, I went to private school. I went to, the university that I went to study medicine. It was a private school also, and I have lived in privilege, and I was not aware of that privilege. And so this school, this practice experience as a medical student, it changed my life forever. And so I decided that I was not going to practice medicine as every other doctor. I was not interested in the money. I would manage somehow, which I did. But I decided to go to very far away places to practice medicine. And this is me very young, still giving, I was already educating, because you cannot be a good doctor without educating your patients. And so when I went to these communities and I saw all this, the reality of how people live, this was in the jungle. I was like a Doctors Without Borders kind of doctor. And I had to educate them. So I became an educator by having to do it, because it was a need and I needed to do it. So this was the reality that I experienced there. Women, in charge of everything. So I also learned to appreciate women. Men were in directed places, right? So it was an interesting experience. And then this is this lady here. This lady here, the one who's pregnant, she's the mother of the other two on the back. And she's waiting for us. We came with the medical brigade, and she's waiting for her consultation. And here's my daughter with a little hat. And we're traveling along the river, and we're going to one of these brigades in a very small canoe that transported bananas. So that was kind of my experience there. But we also had a headquarters. And so you see a more sophisticated house here. That was our medical center, or clinic, if you wish. And this experience of going to these fairly far away places showed me things like this little girl, who was probably 6 or 7, and she was selling yuca on the street. And that was the first time probably that I appreciated my privilege. You see here with the uniform and my little brother. And so, and then on this down here, on the left, you see Maria. She was a professional lady who also left it all in the city and came to these very far away places to become a teacher, a school teacher. And I got to see men working very hard. They are milling cane sugar here, and you see the woman on the right. She is cooking on a stove made of mud. So this reality necessarily changed my perspective of the world and changed everything. But for that transformative process to happen, I needed to think about it. And I'm still thinking about it, because I have not grasped all the reality of it. When I came to the United States 23 years ago, I had to reinvent my life. And I had already quit medicine and became an art therapist. I like to do psychotherapy because I started to work with youth, and it was a wonderful experience. So that's where my being as an educator, was highlighted. So these are kids I lived in front of the beach, so we had these gatherings, and sometimes they got to go to the beach. Sometimes they just gather in my living room, and so you see them, they love the stairs for some strange reason. That's what they like to sit. And we had these enormous events there, or you see how happy they were. And this is me around here on the left down. And the guy receiving a diploma, he's one of the most successful kids who went through this school that we had and the non-for-profit that were with youth. And he is now in Saudi Arabia. And he has, I don't know how many diplomas and doctorates and things. He's a very successful guy. And you see Nadia here, who's a professor in Maine. And you see Carlos somewhere around here, who also has 2 masters, very successful kids. And it was, what was interesting about this experiment that we did, it was an experiment. We didn't know what we were doing. That's the truth. We didn't know when we started what we were doing. But it was a reflective process all the time, where they would talk about their lives. There were no structured meetings. They would come to a meeting every Friday, every single Friday. Instead of going to party, they would come to our house, to my house, and talk about their lives and what was important for them and the doubts that they had about life. And this reflective process, it totally transformed their lives and mine. And of course, this is my master, right? She is my main teacher. And so here she is when she was very little. And we were I was in some hospital up in the mountains, practicing medicine with very poor people. And so she got to see that reality. Also, she will also go with me on the brigades. And now she's a very successful lady, and she has a nice husband, thanks God. So one of the things that I needed to do as an educator was to put what I was learning, and I needed to put it in writing. So that's my experience, this reflection of who I am. This was my first book, a little book about, it was based on psychoanalysis. That's what I was at the time, 1997. And this was a book about, the second one is about Reiki, because I started getting into holistic medicine, and I needed to talk about that also. So as you see, what I said at the beginning, my mind is quite divergent. And this is my most recent book, where I started to talk about a topic that had been important for me for 30 years, which was, how we could be, put heart and mind together and evolve consciously from fear to solidarity. See, now this doesn't want to work. So why the spiral? If you look, I don't know if you made the notes that I asked you to do at the beginning about the turning points in your life. And I don't know if you noticed, but I have noticed this with other people, is that we go in a spiral. We learn a little bit about something here at this point in our lives, and then we continue working and gathering experiences and reading and learning from others. And then suddenly we find ourselves kind of on the same place, but in a higher dimension. And this is how I conceive learning. And I think that reflexive, only when you're really reflective of your learning process, you can really learn and surpass certain moments in your life that are very difficult. I'm gonna stop this sharing for a second, because I want to, I always want to listen from you and see if you have any questions so far.
I just was going to comment, Silvia, so much of what you're describing. I have a student who just came back from study abroad, well, the service project in the Dominican Republic with our drop program, and he's different. He's just in the course of a week being in the DR and seeing extreme poverty for the first time in his life, coming from great privilege. So much of what you're talking about really resonates with that experience that our students get to encounter. And he's talked about the use of the reflective time at the end of every day, where they've all come together to reflect on that experience. And they're actually doing now a week-long follow-up this Friday. And so it just really resonated for me as I was listening to you talk about this experience.
Right. Yeah, I do have 2 drop students in my class, and they also came transformed. Right? I teach compassionate parenting, and they have a journal. I'll talk about that. But and what I collect from that, I see the growth. It's so interesting, because at the beginning they're very shy about what they are sharing, right? And then they get to like it a little bit more and a little bit more, and they connect the learning with what they have experienced, and suddenly they are talking about themselves and applying what they are learning. to their lives, not only transform their lives before they can think of transforming anything in the world, right? Any other question? I'll go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. Which one was that? That one, right? Okay. So what are the cognitive processes needed for transformative learning? Oh boy. It is behaving funny. So that was the main question for today, right? How does your positionality bias your epistemology? We are the life that we have lived, and it is impossible to teach without having that in mind. We have a position about how to teach, about how to grade, about how to punish, because sometimes we punish, right? And sometimes that's unavoidable. And so we go from experiences to examine our assumptions. What are our assumptions about things? I mean, it's so natural for us to think in terms of grading. I hate grades. You know, I had an interesting discussion with my students about grades because I started to say, I don't like grades, I don't like grades. And the students will say, push back, right? I do want my good grade. And I say, it's not important. The grade is not important if it doesn't reflect your learning process. You know, because you can do a good paper and the paper says basically nothing new, nothing important. You didn't really research the topic. You just talk a bunch of things. And so we reflect upon those things. And I am so glad to see not all the students get it, but most of them do. You know, most of them do. Some just the class and get over it with, you know. But when we examine our assumptions, we can go to the next step, which is to challenge our perspectives. You know, I used to tell people, and please nobody get offended by what I'm going to say, because I say it lovingly, believe me. But I think that it is very difficult to be born in the United States for the people who were born here. Because you're born since you're a baby, what you're learning about the United States is that it is the greatest country in the world. There's people who might challenge that concept, but I'm not challenging it. I'm just saying it is very difficult to grow up in a country where you have to be up to an impossible standard. You know, that you need to be worthy of the greatest country of the world. And in one of my experiences, it puzzled me for quite a while as a psychotherapist, was the people came with this feeling of not being enough, nothing that they did was enough. And I think it comes in part from that paradigm. So we need to challenge our perspectives. What's greatness, you know? I will rate a country as great when it is really compassionate, for example. So my mind goes to Bhutan and New Zealand and countries like that. Not the UK, for example. You know, the UK, I don't know if you know this, but during the pandemic, because they were so concerned about the economy and not the people, they got the highest mortality and morbidity in all the Western countries. And in Bhutan, it's a small population of only 1 million people or so. And after every time that somebody died, the prime minister will give a speech. They only had 6 people dying during the pandemic. That's extraordinary. And it's the way they managed the pandemic, with a lot of compassion. That's the paradigm that is privileged there. So once you examine your experiences and you challenge your assumptions and perspectives, a transformation happens. And that's the real learning. Learning is about change. So when I see a student, and don't take me wrong with this, but when I see a student, I almost see them calling me to shatter them, unravel them, ignite them, restore them, defy them, and reimagine them. This is how I see my students. I don't think that they come just for a grade. I don't think that they come just to complete the courses that they need to graduate and have a college a paper, a degree, so that they can get a better job and a better salary. And so I try to provide a transformative experience for them. There's always a story to tell. Who has the story? You have a story as the professor, and the student brings a story. There's a story behind them. So do we get to know our students? Do we get to get them link the learning, the theory with what they like, what they want, what their life is? And so that's, for me, what transformative learning is about. So we need to listen to the stories and find ways to listen to these stories. So you heard Maria talking about the journals. Journals are a great way of listening to those stories. What other ways, I'm asking you guys, what other ways have you found to collect feedback from the students? Anybody? If you're trying to talk, we're not listening, we're not hearing you.
Delphine is putting a comment in the chat.
Okay, let me see. Self-assessment, great way to listen to students, yes. So do you assess the learning process that took place? Yeah, your mic might be off because we cannot hear you. You need to put it on the chat, maybe. I want to
yeah, so every end of a unit or something like that, I do ask them if the class is still meeting their expectation, what has been the most useful or enjoyable, if they have any suggestions, and then I ask them to assess themselves on how they're participating in class, and then add any information that I might need to know that might be affecting their participation in the class.
That's a great way to listen from them. So, so what do you use it for? Sorry, you should say it, not if. What do you use it for? So do you use it to shape what you do in the class?
Well, I think something that you mentioned, both the COVID and the importance of affiliation, I think developing an ethics of care has been even more on my mind lately. And so I want them to feel seen and to feel heard, and to adapt the class as we're going with how they're feeling. But also so that it's not just me assuming, back to assumptions, assuming that what I see is what is going on. And so really inviting them in to help me see them in the way that they want me to see them.
That's great. So one of the things that happens when we are in the professor position is that one of the big biases that we have is that we teach what we need to learn. We teach what is interesting to us, isn't it? Right? And we think that the others should learn what we need to learn. So we're very interested in our topic, but that might not be true with, for everybody there in the room. So that's one of the main biases that we have. And so one of the things that I've thought about this a lot, and that the real meaning of meditation, we talk about meditation a lot these days, is that we need to examine our lives, right? So where are we in the present moment? If you close your eyes for a second and you think, who am I right now? Am I the same person that I was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? And the other thing that we need to examine there is if our academic knowledge leads to personal growth, if there's a link. And when we understand that, we understand that, this knowledge that we have accumulated through the ages is important, and I mean, intellectually it is useful. But if it hasn't transformed us, it's interesting. I don't think that can happen. I think it always transforms us in some way, right? So but that's a good question. Does academic knowledge lead to personal growth? There was this guy who drew caricatures in Argentina, and he had a very interesting character called Mafalda, and Quino. His name is Quino, and one of his drawings was about this guy. He's a very old guy sitting in the middle of his one of the rooms in his house. And the room of the house is filled with books, you know, from the bottom to the ceiling is filled with books and books and books. There are books in the table, there are books on the desk, there are books everywhere. And he's sitting there in a chair saying, and now what? You know, so what do we learn from it? You know, we cannot apply it. So the same happens with our students. What do they learn for? And how do we help them reflect on that learning process? So we invite meditation, that's reflection, right? So one of the things that I ask the students is if the knowledge that they are receiving is relevant to them. How is it relevant to you? What kind of insights did you gain by the past 2 weeks classes? And how would you apply it? And this reflective process is incredibly fruitful. There are only very few students who come out with nothing. Nothing, I mean, is just they are just filling a paper as a questionnaire, you know. They are not really doing the reflective process. So this is really important. So I think that one of the instruments, the most interesting instruments of reflection, of transformative learning, is the reflective journaling. It facilitates the exploration of beliefs that we hold and how they shape our learning. It helps us integrate what we already know with the new knowledge. It helps us become increasingly aware of our cognitive process. And the most important thing, it enhances the understanding of self and others. So if we enhance the understanding of self, we become more self-compassionate, less self-judgmental. But the same happens with the others. The more we reflect about our relationship with others and the relationship with the knowledge that we're acquiring and how we're going to use it, the more we develop these cognitive capabilities that makes us empathetic. That's cognitive empathy, one of the aspects of empathy. So it is an invitation to become mindful of our teaching process, but also of the learning process that takes place. So journals are a metacognitive tool that is incredibly valuable. Okay, so we did this research, and I'm going to go through the research very fast because we don't have a lot of time. I was going to say a lot of money, because time is money, right? But okay, so we did this with a group of 14 students who were taking a 16-week college class. It was a humanities class, and the topics were kindness, empathy, and compassion. But they will also examine self-compassion, vulnerability, parenting styles, and active listening. Those were the main topics in the class. One of the things that they found is that being vulnerable allowed them to connect with each other, which was an interesting finding. Who were these students? They were, half of them were male, half were female, from 17 to 21 years. And there were 8 white and 4 what's called BIPOC, and 2 that I never knew. One because she how do you call that? Dropped the class. And the other one because the only way that I had to know about their ethnicity was by looking at them, and this person didn't want to turn on the video when I interviewed him. And so for you, just in case, BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That's one of the denominations that they are using these days. So my background was, where I started is when I look at, that's what I got interested in, epistemology. You know, because I'm a guardian ad litem, and I know that the judges send parents who are separated from the children, they ask them to take parenting classes. Go take a parenting class. And the parenting class needs to be an evidence-based parenting class. So it's not any kind of class. And I started to look at these parenting classes, and what I found is that all of them were focused on behavior modification. It totally dismissed where the parents were coming from. It didn't elicit any kind of reflection. So parents were not aware of what they were doing, period. Maybe they were invited to look at what they were doing wrong, but they were never, what were there? You don't work from what you're doing wrong. You work from what the strengths you have, right? And so I started to see, it looks like there's a bias that is influencing the research. So what kind of epistemological bias is going there? One of the things that came to my mind right away is that in Latin America, most of psychologists are not cognitive or behavioral. They use dynamic psychotherapy. And they are influenced by psychoanalysis. Argentina and Colombia are big on psychoanalysis, for example. Brazil is also big in psychoanalysis. It's a completely different approach to therapy and to understanding the mind. And I say, wow, yeah. So the United States is the opposite. In the United States, the approaches are cognitive and behavioral. So I started to ask me if there was an epistemological bias. The designer of the courses, the designer of the programs that were delivered to parents, had they ever examined if they had biases in the way they were putting together courses or delivering these courses? Did the trainers of these courses had any training to look at themselves? And I found that no, and there was a big gap in the literature about that. So I started, that's why, okay, so that's a little bit more about the same, the programs were focused on preventing parental abuse, which is great, school readiness and behavioral outcomes. They were never focused on how do we make our children love themselves or love others. How do we make these children more empathetic, or the parents more empathetic with the children, compassionate? So that's what, my assumption is that the people who designed these courses needed to examine what they were doing to prevent biases, because they bring their upbringing, their culture, their training to these programs. And the instructor also needed to see how their biases were influencing the way they deliver and the content decisions that they made. So very fast, there was a case study. We collected data from journals, semi-structured interviews, and a final paper. And this is what was very interesting, because when you look at the journals, these students are reflecting a lot on what is going on in class and how they are learning about empathy, and how they are learning about kindness and appreciating kindness more, and started to see that they weren't aware of how the tough moments that people were going through, etc. There was a lot of reflection on that. And when we collected the final papers, one of the things that we noticed is that the papers they needed to build a module where they had the objectives, the learning objectives, the topics that they were going to develop, and how would they deliver the topics. And half of the topics that they included in these papers, curiously, had nothing to do with what they had seen in class. So where did this come from? So that's where we saw the epistemological bias, right? That's what was happening. Their experience had shaped what they wanted to teach to others. So I'm not going to go through the themes. This is available if you want, but basically, this is what came out from the examining the material that they gave us. And one of the most interesting things about these findings is that all of the students who participated in that class, all of them came out of the class with the intention to parent with compassion. And that was beautiful. That was what motivated me to teach this one-time class in compassionate parenting. Okay. So this is already mentioned about those findings. because I want to leave some time for you to do questions. So let me see. What happened here? It's not advancing. Come on, go. Okay. The implications of the studies, some of the things that we have already said, you know, that reflection helps students kind of digest the learning process that took place and modify behavior, if that's what we want, right? Because they set different intentions to how they are going to use the learning. And they help the reflective practice itself looks to be useful for them. They had started to enjoy the process of reflecting, and they see that it makes their learning process easier. But most importantly, it prevents, I think, epistemological biases. So that's what I advocate for. I advocate for educational programs to incorporate reflective practices, learn about life experiences from the students, go from what is known to them, what is important and significant for them, and then the learning process changes a lot. So these are some of the references. I went a little fast because I know time is an issue. So, but I really wanted to leave some space to interact with you guys and hear from you.
So Silvia, I have a question both for you, but also for my colleagues that are in the STEM disciplines. You know, I know for those of us in the arts and the humanities and the social sciences that using reflective journaling is something we're comfortable with. We do it in a lot of our classes, but I'm also thinking about, you know, colleagues like my friend Daniel here and Jafar and, you know, some of the other folks that come out of very different kinds of disciplines. But it's also an area of great concern for us because we're trying to deal with the DFW rate. I would love for us to reframe that. Instead of reducing the DFW rate, I'd love to see us call it increasing the ABC rate, which just sounds a whole lot better. But you know how, and I also know from Andrea's research from Rock that what she found is that when people take a course like one of our Rock courses, they actually do better in their STEM courses. And they're seeing increases in their performance in those classes because they do have a place to reflect on themselves, their learning, on compassion. How might, and so again, I said this question is both for Silvia, but also for my STEM colleagues. How might you use reflective journaling or some form of reflection to help students learn better in some of these classes where they're really struggling?
So, excuse me, one thing I do a little background, I'm a chemist. I teach organic chemistry, and we do a lot of labs, and in the labs, where they're supposed to be connecting, you know, what we do hands-on with what they do in the classroom. So as a part of every lab report that I have them do, I ask, you know, kind of discuss some, you know, between 3 and 5 things that you learned out of this process, and how that has affected, you know, your understanding of the topic and things like that. I leave it pretty open-ended, and it's something that is a little bit weird. They really don't like doing that reflection in this way. You know, I guess they're used to it in much more of a personal way. But you know, just trying to think about what did they actually learn. You know, I think it really it helps to cement some of those things.
And I guess for a subject such as chemistry, it's a little bit more difficult because, you know, but why are they there in the first place, right? So what brought them to take that class? And how do they see themselves applying what they learn in the class to real life? Because what's learning for, right? One of the things that sometimes they don't connect. In my class, in the compassionate parenting class, I asked them to build a project. And they were totally lost about what it means to build a project. You know, what's the project? What the project is for? He didn't, I mean, for the second assignment, they left the subject matter out. The project is to promote compassionate parenting. And there were some of the students who did a great job on the paper, and they don't even mention compassionate parenting. I was like, what happened here? So there's a disconnection, right? Because they are so used. This is the bias. This is the big bias that they bring to the class. I need a good grade. That's it. That's all that matters. I need to pass the class. I need to have a good grade. And when you ask them to reflect and think, you know, I can do something with this learning, it makes a big, big difference. So I had a student, and I was the only one. This is a student who comes from, what do you call them? Depressed communities. I don't know what's the proper term these days because they change so much. You know, I don't want to use the wrong term, but it's a depressed community, right? And so she didn't know. She was thinking about studying compassion in gorillas or something like that. That's how she came to me. That was her initial intention. And then suddenly I see this PowerPoint that she sends me. And my first thought when I saw the PowerPoint presentation is she copied it from somewhere, because it was so different from what she had talked in class, her behavior in class, some of the things that she says on the journal. I was like, this cannot come from her. What happened here? I didn't understand. And the project was about her community. It's something that she knew very well, right? When she started to talk about, you know, the youth in that community and the problems that this youth had. And suddenly she connected it with compassionate parenting and say, if we train the parents in compassionate parenting, maybe we have different outcomes. And it was the best project of all, you know, so much that I did something that I usually don't do. And I did it because I'm biased. But so my bias was that I said, the second part of the assignment is the group assignment. The first one was individual. Then they needed to combine their, learn to collaborate and do a joint paper. And I wanted her paper, I wanted to push a little bit for that group to consider that paper as a paper that they were going to adopt. And they did, because they saw the strength of the paper. So I mentioned that in class. I mentioned the strength of the paper in class. And I think this is important, right? Because what is meaningful to me, that's what I learn about. It's always about me. You're the teacher, but it's always about you. You are the learner, right? And so we need to have this dynamic relationship with the students where you say, okay, so what is what we talk about what is that student-centered education. For me, you know, my classes are disorganized. Divergent thinking. This is my divergent thinking. Disorganized in what way? Well, you know, when I look at the journals, when I look at their assignments, when I look at the interactions that I've had with them, when I look at what happens in class, then I see, oh, I see that this concept was not clear. So what do? The first thing that I do in class, then the following time, is to bring those issues back. And I say, you know, I see that you haven't, let's go back through what this and this means, right? And so they don't understand why at the very beginning of the class is kind of a tutti frutti, right? So it's like mixed. But that's how I go back and back to what the holes that I can see in the process of understanding the topics. Mm-hmm. So this is what I understand by reflection, right? So I am biased all the time, you know, because I think that they need to understand everything that I say. Right? That's my main bias. It's like I'm delivering a good class. What's the matter with them? We see them as a problem usually. This is the main bias that all teachers have. They are lazy, they are tired, they are not interested in the class. You don't know. You really don't know, right? But that's our main bias, right? And it colors everything that we say, everything that we do. You can dispute me if you want. I love disputes. Not disputes, arguments, debates. Okay. Anything else? I love participation. If you have anything to say, please do.
Well, I think, and I'm not in the STEM field, so, you know, I might be mistaken, but I think one of the ways that you can still build some of the reflective practice while building the community is also by incorporating icebreakers throughout the semester. I think we use them the first week and then we drop them, but I know more and more, and again, it's kind of like COVID reflection. I know that more and more in my classes, I've been incorporating them throughout, and it can help ease out into a specific task by trying to show the connection to how it might apply to their lives in one way or another. But sometimes it might just be a way to check in with them, and therefore make them feel more motivated to be in the same space.
And what are my icebreakers? You're going to laugh at me. I love TikToks. And they laugh at me because I continuously say that I love TikToks. And so the other day, I introduced one little TikTok, very brief TikTok, where a father is teaching this toddler to bat a ball, right? To kick the ball with bat. And so the father gives him an instruction. The instruction is, put your eye to the ball, right? And so the toddler goes and puts the eye to the ball and kicks the ball. And so this is about instructions. So it was a very nice TikTok to discuss what it means to follow instructions and how everybody understands it from their perspective. Because sometimes this is what we're talking about, positionality, right? So we try to deliver things, information and everything to students from our point of view. You know, this should be easy for them to understand. How can they not, right? But what about their point of view and the way they process and understand the information that we are delivering, right? Well, guys, you've been a very receptive group. Thank you very much for showing up. And if you have any comment that you want to leave on the chat, I will appreciate it. And if you're interested in the recording, I will send it to the Lucas Center to be distributed, okay?
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Leave any comment that you want.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
They might have walked away.
I can ask them to go. Okay. All right.
You did great. That was great. That was great. And I was very happy that, Daniel spoke up and Jan was commenting and Delphine, those are all people I know. And very, very pleased. And, I think, some of the things I was bringing up at the end, which is so central